My name is Charles Epting, and you're listening to the Lost Labels podcast. I'm back today with part 2 of my interview with Chris Butler of the Waitresses. In part 1 of the interview, we discussed how Chris got involved in the music business, how he came to join the Numbers Band, and then Tin Huey, and eventually splintered off and formed his own band, the Waitresses. In part 2, we're going to get up to speed sort of the second half of his career because he's done some projects that I find absolutely fascinating that could not be more different from the work you may know of his with the Waitresses. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well as some other burning questions that I'd been hoping to ask Chris. So without further ado, we're going to get Chris back on. Chris, to start things off, are there any bands from the Akron scene that you think could have or should have achieved more success than they did? Are there any bands that you think are unfairly overlooked that could have been something really special?
Yes. Hammer Damage. Hammer Damage were an Akron band. Witty, clever, smart, hard rock band. Definitely Hammer Damage. Let's see. Well, I have to say 50, 60, 75, the Numbers Band, which I've mentioned so many times, as a leader in terms of infusing originality into the scene and demanding that they be recognized as artists. And not just, although they did sell a lot of beer, and he knew how to write a song that balanced his beer selling requirement, dancing, versus self-expression, not versus, but to include self-expression. He was able to balance that. So definitely 50, 60, 75. There was a band called Human Switchboard in Kent who were very good. I never quite got them. I thought they were. It just didn't appeal to me, but other people thought they were the bomb.
That's interesting because Human Switchboard is a band that I feel receives a lot of acclaim today. I feel like they've been rediscovered by a lot of people in recent years.
Yeah. I'm not a raging fan, and I knew Bob Pfeiffer a lot, and Bob Pfeiffer could be very annoying. Okay, entre nous, Bob Pfeiffer love to talk for hours, and he would call and he would talk, and all he would do was whine about how come we're not more successful? How come we're not more successful? We got Crisco liking us, we got everybody liking us. How come we're not successful? And he would go on and on and on about this. Now, later on, he went on to be head of Hollywood Records and signed Alice Cooper, revived his career and all of this. So he personally got recognition, and plus a whole lot of other dark stuff, which I won't get into historically. But I mean, they were one of the band most likely. And let's see, who else? I mean, I just thought Pere Ubu was a shit, and Pere Ubu should have. Well, they were so odd and such an art band, and maybe it was unrealistic to think that they would, let me rephrase that. They certainly were able to saturate the culture and go to England and go to New York and get all the credit. Maybe they went as, because of the times there were open doors. There were radio stations that would play interesting stuff. There were for a while there was the great experiment of PIX in New York, where for 9 months I think you had Meg Griffin. They tried the new wave format. They tried that. It didn't fly, but there was at least a vehicle for, an attempt to do more outsider things. And college radio was huge in terms of breaking, or at least playing things that were a little outside. So maybe they did float to as far as they could in terms of acceptability, considering how weird they were. But I always thought they were such a great example. Well, and I have to say, Tin Huey. Tin Huey was just the most creative band I was ever in. And our first record did not show what we could do. And there's a whole other story about Tin Huey, because Tin Huey could have been, like Flaming Lips. It could have been an institution doing experimental things and having much more fun without getting too much into Tin Huey's story, Tin Huey, in short, Tin Huey should have done what Talking Heads did. When Seymour Stein went down to CBGB and said, "Boy, you guys are great. I want to sign you," they said, "Thank you, no thank you. Next year, we're not ready. We need to, write more. We need to have two records in the can because I know we're not going to be able to write when we're on the road promoting the first album. We need to have a pile of songs. We need to tour on our own. We need to build our audience. We need to solidify what we're doing. We need to find management. We need to do all this stuff. Thank you. Come see us in a year." And Seymour Stein did. So Tin Huey should have done that because I had only been a joined Tin Huey like 3 weeks before all this stuff happened that I didn't feel integrated, and we did not have. We were popular here and maybe Pittsburgh and Detroit, but we didn't even we played Columbus. That's about it. We should have waited a year. We should have said thank you, but we're not together. We don't have our infrastructure. We were going to New York, and we were very hot in New York, which was great. But that wasn't really enough. We should have postponed it and really gotten our act together so that and so we would at least know how to do this more on our terms and think long term, a la Flaming Lips, and say, okay, we're going to be an eccentric experimental band. We're not going to be hit makers. If you want to sign us, you have to, consider us, put us in the camp of, if you like us, which they did, we're your Randy Newman, we're a Van Dyke Parks, we're Little Feat, we're the people that you love, that you wish were more successful, but you're still going to carry for a long Captain Beefheart for a long term, and maybe one day we'll fuck up and get a hit, but don't expect us to be poster boys. This is a band that could not get laid. Okay. There's nobody in this band that is sexy. There's no stars. These are brainy geeks. And we're going to be a brainy geek band. If you can accept that, and then we'll sign the contract. So that year would have given us a better sense of defining ourselves and saying this is who we are, this is who we're not, and maybe the end result would have been that we wouldn't. We would have continued on as an entity that produced its own records and did whatever the fuck it wanted, which would have made things much happier. But by signing with Warner Brothers, we suddenly had, the standard job description, which is, you have to go on the road, promote your record, you have to think about star quality, you have to write hits, you have to, do all that stuff. That was a mistake. We should have waited. So I would certainly add Tin Huey to that pile. There was another wonderful band called Shy Pig from Akron, who were one hand a joke, on the other hand really good. Again, all these people are brilliant musicians. Jesus Christ. Chai Pig could have had a kind of oingo boingo, kind of goofy tubes. That kind of B-52s kind of fun, campy audience, and they probably deserved more out of the Akron area than they got.
Jane mentioned Chai Pig as well. I found their lone 7-inch at a record store in Brooklyn a couple of weeks ago, and it's a great listen, both sides of it.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. They're great. This is Debbie Smith. This is like the killer. This is the James Jameson bass player of Akron. She is like wicked, wicked great. She subbed for Led Zeppelin when John Paul Jones, they were playing in Cleveland. John Paul Jones got a telegram saying that his father had died. He had to return to England right away, and they had a concert. And Debbie was known as like the monster player, and the Belkin people who were the bookers, she was good friends with them, and they said, sit in. And there's no tape and there's no pictures. And I've been looking for the tape and pictures because she carried the concert for them, and they just loved her, and she stepped right up, and she's brilliant, still brilliant, wonderful. She suffers from rheumatoid arthritis. It's such a cruel thing because she's such a great player, and now her fingers don't do what she wants them to do. But this is a heavy duty musician, and yeah, I think Chai Pig could have earned, the word deserve doesn't make it, but we're worthy of having a larger audience.
Someone who looms large in the Ohio musical scene of the mid to late 1970s is Peter Lochner of Rocket from the Tombs and, very briefly, Pere Ubu, who died at age 24, but whose legacy is still celebrated today. Did you ever come into contact with Peter? Did you have any interaction with him during those days?
I just tangentially. I mean, there was a big split between Cleveland and Akron. When I was in the numbers band, Peter and Bob Kidney were pals, and Peter tried to sit in. Now, Peter was a really good guitar player, and but when he sat in a couple times, he was lost. He just did not get, and it's too bad because I would have listened to. There's a couple bunch of tapes of him doing pretty much experimental freeform. We got a gig, get five musicians, go up there and do whatever. So he was used to winging it. But there was a disconnect in that band. Although he was pals with Bob Kidney. I didn't know him very well. I thought, because of the way he played with our band, I thought, this is a poser. But I didn't know his whole history, and and all of this, and all the writing that he did, and all this. And I came to him later than at the time.
Something you mentioned briefly last time that I'd love to hear more about. Tin Huey opened up for television's last concerts at the Bottom Line in 1978, at least the last concerts of the original incarnation of television. What was it like being at those shows? What was television like, and how do you feel the crowd responded to Tin Huey?
Well, the kicker, of course, is they had decided to break up, and these were going to be their last shows. If you listen to the tapes, there are tapes of these shows. They are as phenomenally out there because they didn't give a fuck. And they took more chances and fell off the deep end over and over and over. It was an education. It was a treat. 6 shows over 3 nights. It was gobsmackingly fantastic. Tin Huey was completely embraced and accepted by the diversity of the crowd because they got it. And in New York was the only place we played a lot, and they got Tin Huey. They got our eclecticism. They got our humor. They got that we were great players. It was a good fit. It was a good fit. Of course, we're nothing like television. We tended to be much more structured with very little looseness. We had to, because some of our players were truly knuckleheads and had ADD, and they couldn't remember. Although Tin Huey, on the other hand, Tin Huey came out of getting, one of these get stoned in the basement at Mark Price's parents' house and just blast away for hours and hours. So on one hand, you had the ability to improvise as a group. And on the other hand, you had the fact that if you write a song, the guy who can't remember where to go to a G chord, you got to grind it until he can remember what his part is. So that was one of the negatives. That's why I think the year extra we would have been able to find a balance in that, because as a writer, I wrote parts and structured songs, but as a band, they liked nothing better than to just wing it and make weird noises. So because you were making an album for Warner Brothers, you had to think songs and structure versus freeform shit. And I think we would have found a better balance of that. Because of the eclecticism of the band, the television audience seemed to dig it. And especially Bill Ficca. and which is why later on, when we needed a drummer for Waitresses, he was somebody I thought would get it. Um, because the Waitresses were really an extension of what Tin Huey was, almost same person, same instrument, same personnel. Only I tried to balance that avant-garde thing with songs, commercial, not commercial necessarily, but uh, uh, emph- emph- empathizable, relatable, something, but still, because of the musicians that were in it, we had a lot more space. And also taking the numbers band idea of okay, here's the song, here's the part, um, but never play. You are free to improvise inside the song as long as you know that there's a verse here and that Patty's got to do something. But how you get to A and A to B is up to you, your responsibility. And so it really made for a great band. That was the balance between improvisation and structured songs, and we were going more and more in that direction of more of an improvisational band, which kind of left Patty behind because what's she going to do? Play the tambourine? Um, but the band fell apart before we could, I could actually figure out what to do with all this. I mean, I had my plans, but what to do with Patty and how to integrate her into this. But we never got there. I mean, both our records, our albums, end with these kind of free-form songs that were basically lines left over that were never used in other songs that are kind of spoken word with a clattery, jazzy, improvised background. Both songs, Jimmy Tomorrow and They're All of Liquor, Let's Find Another Party. Those were like a parking those songs were parking spaces for leftover lyrics, and a chance for the band to blow, to just to, do an improvisational thing. So I guess my point is, leading in full circle, we didn't have the focus. Tin Huey didn't have the focus of being a guitar band that plays modal improvisations for as long as your solo, um, as long as you care to take it, with support from the group. We were more structured as Tin Huey as a band, but we were fully capable of being able to get as wiggy as TV in our own way, but we were not, quote, around long enough, or I wasn't integrated long enough for us to realize who we were on that level.
Just recently, on July 22nd, the New York Times published an article called 12 Forgotten Classics by Women-Led New Wave Bands, which was a great piece. It's a fantastic list, all 12 of the songs, but one of them was No Guilt by the Waitresses. What was your reaction to seeing that? How did that make you feel to be included in a list like that so many years after the Waitresses put out their debut record?
That was something I have always ached for. It's great that Christmas wrapping, top 10 Christmas songs, top 20, whatever, that's fine. No Guilt is very significant because they picked a B side. They picked the song that I specifically wrote. Now, the single was "I Know What Boys Like," and it's persona is a cock teaser. It's not very flattering. It's one dimensional aspect of a woman and of a modern woman. And I thought, ooh, okay, is this how we really want? I need to balance it. I need to balance, because I have the opportunity of a B-side. I need to write something that's humane, that is a completely different aspect of a female persona that maybe is not covered. Remember, at the time, you had archetypes. You had the Joni Mitchell folky with long flowing hair and sitting in a lotus position on a Persian carpet with incense burning. You had the folky. You had the leather-clad rock and roll tart. Uh, you had That's about it, you know. Oh, you had a, like a Pat Benatar, or someone who's classically trained, who's kind of like being a rocker, all right, without the leather, but still very much a rock. That was it in terms of archetypes for women in the record business, or presentate, or that kind of those kind of personas. And I thought, well, shoot, how about trying to craft a archetype of the everyday woman. She's working, maybe a secretary, middle management. She artistic and creative. Maybe she has an art project on the side. She lives in New York. She goes to museums, but she's, still working kind of a middle level job, not loving it, not hating it, but, having her boyfriends or relationships or whatever. What about having, writing? If Bruce Springsteen can write to the everyman, the lower class working stiff, how about Chris Butler writing for middle management women, uh, and understanding what they're going through? Remember, this is also the '80s. This is women power. This is the NRA. This is second wave feminism. So all of these forces are also coming and not attacking, but are being part of a woman's milieu. Can you have it all? Can you have a career? Can you have a child? Can you do it all? That kind of feminism. And so, what about making an archetype of that person that would be appealing to women, and also not just mono-dimensional, like the A side, which is just a sexy teaser. So the No Guilt song was really important in terms of, this is a person uh, uh, who is very normal and going through normal things, and is coming out of a relationship and going, wow, I kind of survived it, golly gee. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting. And that little 45 balances the perspective, and also introduced what came to be, I hope, of the Waitresses archetype. And the fact that the Times picked that out of all the other stuff, really, and got it. That's really important. That's what I've always wanted, that somebody gets where I was going with this, and they did. And yeah, 38 years later, but wow, thank you.
The career of Chris Butler after the Waitresses is fascinating to me. It's a collection of seemingly random projects, whether it's getting the world's longest pop song into the Guinness Book of World Records, or an album where all the songs are recorded on various obsolete recording technologies. It seems like you're still having fun. It seems like you're still finding ways to push yourself and challenge yourself. After the Waitresses, how would you describe your career to somebody?
Well, they're not as random as they seem. I like humor, and I like, I have one thing going for me. I get harebrained ideas, and they're usually, unrealistic, and ridiculous, but if they eat at me, I have to make them real. And thankfully, at the time, although it's certainly better now, at the time, the meager revenue from the Waitresses catalog allowed me the freedom to pursue and have a little dough to help build these things and follow these fun directions. Whatever I could come up with, I wanted to have fun, because being in a band on a label is not fun. It wasn't fun for me. And I went through the sausage factory twice, and I just wanted to have fun. And if I get a gag, if I thought of something and it cracked me up, or if I expressed it to, some of my friends who get me, and if they crack up, well, that if I got to laugh, I got to do it. And the idea of the world's longest song, or the idea of taking songs that nobody else, that I had written for other people, who they wound up not using. So you do horror work, but in the end, it doesn't get used. Well, shit. Well, what do I do with that? Well, the only reason to do a song is to have a hit. somebody else's song is to make a hit. Well, I have to invent a band. These are hit songs, so I invented a band, a fake European band called Kilo Pop, and even write a backstory about how they were hits, and you just didn't know about it because they had lousy distribution. So it's very much following, as you do, following one's passions. Uh, some of it accidental. I had a song idea once, and all of my equipment was in the shop, and all I had was this wire recorder. Although it was post-war, it was still the tooling was pre-war, so it's very Art Deco, modern, beautiful machine, and I didn't know if it worked or not. Well, I plugged a mic into it and I sang this song into this wire machine, and what came back was like a field recording from the 1930s. I sounded like Alan Lomax kind of, he found some sharecropper, put a mic in front of him during his lunch break and recorded the song. I go, this is cool. This is so cool. It's time traveling. Well, okay. How far back can I go? Well, I have to go back to Edison. So I met a fella who is the East Coast East Coast expert on Edisonia, and he has a house on Baldwin, Long Island that is filled with Edison memorabilia and equipment. And he records people on wax cylinders. So I go out and visit him, and I have a song, and I play it on the wax cylinder, and it comes back all scratchy and wonderful. It's time tripping. So now we have two. I have two things that are time tripping on these obsolete media. Well, what other obsolete media, since I'm interested in all kinds of recording? Well, there's direct to disc. There's the old tape machines. I'm looking around and I find my uncle worked at Brush Labs in Cleveland, and every once in a while he would bring me some component that they were working on. This was an electronics company. And one time he gave me a box of these crystal mic elements that I used on it when I was a kid. I would stick on a guitar, or I used it as a hi-fi system for myself. And well, Brush made the first commercially available tape recorder in the United States, 1946. It's the Brush Sound Mirror, and the tape at the time was paper-backed. It wasn't even Mylar; it was paper. And we do with the crystal mics that go with it, that came with it in the catalog. You can see them, and we do a song and I began to write things that would be appropriate for the time period that the machine was made, and it came out all wonderful, scratchy and fucked up, and this is great. So now we have three things. So I kept chasing these obsolete forms of recording and using like the Beatles Studer 4-track machine, J37. They had one of those at a recording studio in Hoboken, and next thing I know, I got a phone call from my friend. He says, "Hey, there's this big recording truck up in Weehawken. You should go take a look at it." And oh, okay, a recording truck, cool. Let's go it's the Rolling Stones mobile recording studio. And turns out I know an engineer who's part of the consortium who bought it, and it's available for rent. This is so it was $1,500 for 3 days. Shit. So I get that engineer and we record 2 or 3 songs at a studio with the truck and with the roll, the biggest piece of vintage gear you could possibly find, the coolest, right? So now I have 5, so whatever. So little by little, I began to keep going with this passion for obsolete recording technologies and finding all these things. And I made a record of it called The Museum of Me, Volume 1, because I'm still collecting obsolete ways of recording. And maybe someday we'll do a Volume 2. So what has Chris Butler been doing? Chris Butler has been pursuing the things that are fun and interest me, and I love playing drums. Drums were my first instrument, so I played a lot of drums. When everything blew up, the first thing I did was buy a drum set, as therapy. And I was able to, where I lived, I was able to practice in the basement, and so I got to play drums with various people. So I tried to just think, I called it the Millionaires Game. If I had $1 million, what would I do? And I would pursue all these nutty projects, like the world's longest song or whatever, and just explore how do you make something like this real. Because at the time for the longest song, there was no way to do this except on tape, but there was the beginning of digital audio workstations. And an engineer friend had he was a beta testing site for one of the first ones, and so we thought, well, this, what could strain this program more, what could stress this program to a breaking point, the way engineers test things, right? You test something until a component breaks, then you fix that component, then you test it more. That's how they test rockets or whatever to the moon. You stress the thing until it breaks. Well, this is perfect. Hey, so let's see if we can do the longest song on this DAW and report back to the company that's making this thing, where it broke down, what it couldn't handle. This was as much of a stress as possible. Well, that turned into making it the world's longest song for a minute. It was the world's longest song. So basically, it was trying to do as much as I can, because I felt I do, without getting too much into psychology. I was at Kent State. My friend was killed. I've always felt I was living on, because I ducked and he didn't. I always felt it's not survival guilt, but it was more like survivor obligation, that I felt I was living on borrowed time and I needed to make the most of it. And if I was a creative person, you have to make shit. So I just kept making stuff, and my life has taken a strange path that I'm wanting, I'm in Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood home, of course, why not? It's perfectly logical to me. So basically, I just tried to continue to be an artist, and at least how I defined being an artist, or what I was capable of. I'm very much a B. I'm a B, maybe B plus, B minus maybe. I'm not an A. I get that, but I'm a good B. I'm a solid B. Well, okay, so there's no reason to not pursue things that are of great interest or that are possible to make, and that's kind of been the driving force that keeps me going and doing things.
Chris, I've really enjoyed both of our conversations, and I feel like we could just keep going and going, and hopefully there's a Chris Butler part 3 in the future. I'd love to have you back on. But not only does this wrap up part 2 of my Chris Butler interview, but it wraps up the little series of episodes I've been doing about the Akron sound, about the music coming out of Ohio in the late 1970s. And I've really enjoyed talking to Nick Nicholas of Clone Records, Jane Ashley of Jane Eyre and the Belvederes, and Chris Butler of the Waitresses and Tin Huey and numerous other projects. And I've really enjoyed these episodes because when I set out to make this podcast, I was so focused on New York, where I live, and London, where so many of these great record labels that I'm hoping to profile were based, that I sort of had blinders on it. I was just focused on New York and London, New York and London. And over the last couple of months, I've been amazed at how often I keep coming back to these Ohio records. And it's not the first place you would think of for all this great music to originate out of, but there's so many great singles and a couple of key compilations that do a really good job of collecting all of these essential songs together. It's really been a pleasure and an honor to be able to speak to 3 stalwarts and real essential people from the Akron sound, whether or not that's an apt term, as Chris Butler explained. It's been a lot of fun for me to speak to these people and to get their firsthand accounts. I started by reading Robert Christgau's article about this music when he actually went and visited himself and interviewed these people. So to be able to speak to a couple of people who were featured in that article all these years later, myself, to have my own firsthand account of that scene has been again just a real pleasure. I'm hoping to visit Ohio in the next couple of months to meet Nick and Chris in person. So fingers crossed that happens. But in the meantime, I'm going to bid my farewell to Akron. And the next couple of episodes are going to focus on the label that really was the driving force behind the creation of the Lost Labels podcast, the record label that has captivated not just me, but I think a lot of people over the years. Stiff Records out of the UK, which is where Elvis Costello got his start, where Nick Lowe got his start as a solo artist. A label that, again, there's so much myth-making, there's so much mystique, and who knows if a lot of the stories about the label are even true. I hope to, maybe prove some of them true, maybe dispel some of them. But the next couple of episodes are going to focus on Stiff Records out of the UK. So thank you to my 3 guests from Ohio. And for the next episode, we'll be hopping across the Atlantic and picking up there. So as always, thank you for listening to the Lost Labels podcast. I'm Charles Epting. Until next time.